Everyone, good morning. How are y'all doing?
Good morning. Fine, great.
Morning.
Good morning.
Awesome, awesome. We'll get started in just a minute here. We'll give people maybe until 9:32 Eastern or so to hop on, and we'll go and get started.
Yeah, thanks for coming to this, everyone. The entire meaning behind the campfire session, I guess, is to create a space for you all to chat with each other and for our team to share some more knowledge. And it's really all about sharing stories together. So if you all want, what you teach in the chat and what grade levels, maybe if you feel so inclined to put a little bit about how you've been using Flint, just so everyone else can see what everyone else is doing very quickly. That'd be cool. But yeah, otherwise, Sohan will start with a presentation soon.
This is actually our first campfire session, and this one will be a little bit more presentation heavy. That said, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A and just kind of folks to share and tell how they've been using Flint as well. For future ones, we have one coming up tomorrow if you're a lower school teacher or administrator that works with lower school teachers. And we have one coming up next week for reviewing kind of recent product updates. And those will be more kind of conversational and panel-esque. So hope you can make it to some of those too. Awesome. Thanks for sharing in the chat, Kathleen. Yeah, if anyone else wants to go ahead. Awesome. I guess, Tony, you're not teaching anymore. That was your last year teaching. It's pretty funny. Yeah, I remember I met Tony in person at Bay Ridge Prep last year, I think in December, in New York. And yeah, you had a lot on your plate, I could tell. Awesome. And Mrs. Davis calling in from the UK. Yeah, glad you could join us. Awesome. We're going to go ahead and get started. Feel free to continue sharing in the chat. I'll start off basically by sharing a few slides, and I'll alternate between slides and showing kind of a live demonstration of how you can do some of these exam prep strategies in Flint. So at any point, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Lulu will respond. And then this presentation is going to be basically broken down into 3 to 4 parts. And at the end of each of those parts, we're going to have time for Q&A as well, so we can kind of unmute, ask live questions too. Also, while I'm showing any of the live demonstrations of Flint, feel free to follow along if you want to kind of open up a new tab and do the same. And the recording for this will also be shared afterwards too. With that, I'm going to go ahead and pull up my screen share, so you should be able to see the presentation we've got for today. There we go. And again, if anyone's facing any sort of technical issues, feel free to put them in the chat. Usually with Google Meets, the restarting Chrome or refreshing does the trick. Awesome. All right, well, everyone, welcome to the first Flint Campfire session for exam review activities. We figured this would be timely given finals and midterms coming up for your students. And we're going to cover in today's session both teacher-driven and student-driven ways of using Flint for exam review. So here's the basic structure of what we're going to cover. The first is going to be the why, right? Why even use Flint or any AI tool for review? What's the additional value that it can give you over strategies you used in the past? Then we'll kind of go into a live demonstration of simple review activities that take just a few minutes to set up and some more professional or advanced review activities that might let you cater your more custom preferences of how you would want to do a review with your students. These sections should take around 10 minutes of demonstration time, but the asterisk here, represents the fact that we'll have a kind of an open space here for Q&A and for folks to share kind of ideas and inspiration. And then, time permitting, we'll wrap up with the student-led review section, which will show you a couple different ways that you can encourage students themselves to go further and get extra help in topics where you may not have had a chance to set up specific activities for them. So for students that are looking for extra review opportunities, there are ways they can use Flint without you setting up everything for them. And just as a reminder, the recording for the session will be available later. So if you're taking notes, feel free to continue doing that, but we will send out an email early next week with the recording for this session. It'll also be on our website. And questions at any point are welcome. So feel free to put the question in the chat. You all have probably met Lulu at some point. She's here on this call today. So she'll be answering any questions in the chat. And then the two of us will also be answering any live questions at the end of any of these kind of 3 to 4 sections. Awesome. With that, let's cover the why. It's really easy for us as a company to say like, hey, we have this cool product and your schools are using it, so you should use it for like all these different things. But we have heard anecdotally from teachers that using Flint and AI tools in general helps adapt content for exam review better to meet the needs of each individual student. So this graph may be familiar to you. It represents kind of the broad spectrum of student performance you might see, right? Maybe it follows like a normal distribution. As a teacher, oftentimes you have to cater to this kind of middle, between the negative first, the first standard deviation of student performance, right? You have to address students where they're at, and it's really hard to address the needs of students that are falling behind or the students that are further ahead. And we find that during an exam period, this trend becomes even more extreme, where it's hard for students that are maybe falling behind in class to catch up during that critical point. With Flint and with AI tools in general, it becomes much easier to cater to each individual student's need. This is a quick testimonial we have from a physics teacher over at the Kincaid School in Texas around how she's used Flint for exam review. So she basically has set up an activity, and we're going to cover how to do this in today's session, to let students review the end of unit content for an upcoming test. And she actually noticed that the student performance was noticeably higher than in previous years. And a lot of this comes down to the fact that the students that are really struggling can get more structured help and feedback from the AI, versus students that are doing a great job can go further and go ahead and practice more advanced questions, which is obviously something that would be much harder to do with a static study guide or with a single review session where you're trying to manage the needs of students at different levels. So basically what we're trying to create with Flint is a representation of this diagram where the AI is able to help each of your students. Maybe it's doing it 10 p.m. the night before the test when you might not be available. And of course, you're going to have visibility into how each of them are doing. Any questions there about the why? Feel free to drop them in the chat or unmute and start talking.
I'll also just add a couple other anecdotes I've heard about this, but yeah, teachers have said that sometimes when the students are using it, they can ask it to explain a concept in a different way to them, and that helps a lot. So if you incorporate that into your activity, if the student still seems confused, explain this in this manner or in this other manner, that can help. And we've also seen some teachers use the students' learning methods and have the student be aware of that. And then that way they can ask the AI to also explain it in a way that's conducive to the way that they learn best. So yeah, that dynamic state of how AI can respond is really helpful to individual students.
Awesome. With that, we're going to jump into the next section, which is going to be how you can set up simple review activities in Flint. So I'm going to show two different activity types. If you used Flint recently, I would say anytime this school year, some of what I'll show here will be familiar because this was part of a recent update we came out with, I believe, back in August. What's nice about these simple review activities is they take less than 5 minutes each to set up. So it's really easy to get started with these. That said, to create something more custom, we're going to be covering those in the next section. So those two simple review activities you can create are a quiz or a problem-solving activity in Flint. So I'm going to walk through the steps and the customization options for each, and I'll show you a completed example of what that would look like once you go and set that up for your students. So I would use this for any sort of content you want students to quickly review and maybe assess their understanding at, maybe before an in-class review session or before the exam is coming up. The first is this quiz option. And if you go into Flint and you want to kind of click around and follow along, that's going to be the very first option at the top of your screen. Now, again, if you've been using Flint since August, this should be familiar to you. But if you go ahead and click on this quiz option, this is our most versatile kind of activity option in Flint. The AI will start off kind of, again, as that teaching assistant asking you, what sort of content do you want to quiz your students on? So here you could upload a single YouTube video to create a very simple kind of contained exit ticket. But you could go ahead and click reading or the other option. and then upload as much content as you like, up to 200 pages of text-based content. You can also even upload images that include PDFs. So here, I would say if you're looking for the easiest way to set up a review activity that's going to quiz your students and let you know how they did, go ahead and click the quiz option, click either reading or other, doesn't really matter, and then upload the study guide into here. You can even upload different standards that will be covered on the exam or reference material depending on what you're teaching. And then the AI will basically be able to go through and quiz students on their understanding of that content. I've got a very simple quiz set up here. This was for a mitosis kind of exam for a biology class. As you can see, as the teacher, I basically uploaded this PDF when I selected the quiz option. This happens to be a pretty short 2 to 3 page PDF, but of course you can put in something much longer, much more in depth. And then as a teacher, now that I've given this activity out to my students, maybe I've encouraged them to use it as an open-ended kind of review option, I can see how each of them did, and I can click into their individual student performances. In this case, I can click on how Lulu did and see exactly what Lulu's areas of improvement were. Looks like she had a poor understanding of interface. So this would be the easiest way to use Flint is click that quiz option, upload some content in, and what the AI will do in this conversation is essentially go through and ask students questions about the topic. So if the student says, yes, I'm ready to begin, it's just going to go through that PDF very simply and ask them about each step. So it's going to say, okay, during interphase, this happens. Can you describe what happens to chromatin during this stage? And it'll just continue asking further in-depth questions. One of the other nice things about using any of these shortcuts up at the top, including the quiz option, is all the prompts are automatically designed for you. So if I go into the activity settings here, I can see that the AI is designed to never provide direct answers, to guide students with follow-up questions, and to provide feedback on each of the responses. So you don't have to worry about telling the AI to do that. We've already designed it to do that for you. The next option I'd recommend, and this will be a better fit if you're teaching a STEM class, particularly something in math, science, or computer science, is problem-solving practice. Now, unlike the quiz, which can cover kind of a wider variety of topics, the problem-solving practice will kind of drill down and just give students a lot of practice solving multiple problems, and you have more customization options available here as well. So I can quickly show you how that works. To get started, you would again click the problem-solving practice option here. From the get-go, Flint understands that this is more so a review activity, so it's going to explicitly ask you for a study guide, a worksheet, or even something as broad as the name of the class. So for example, here I can type in something like Algebra 2, or I could upload a study guide and click Next, and then it'll give me specific categories of problems that I can give to my students. What's nice here is that if I upload a study guide, it'll actually pull different categories of problems from that study guide. Here, let's say I select quadratic functions and polynomial functions. You can also click other and put in your own problem types and click next. It'll kind of give you these additional customization options. So for example, I could say, give my students progressively harder questions and make sure that they show every step of their work and click create. So as you can see with the problem solving practice option, it's a little bit more focused. You can have these other customization options, but it's still pretty straightforward to set up. It takes less than 5 minutes to do that. So I'd recommend if you're getting started with Flint for the first time, or if you want to set up a quick review activity and one of these look good to you, go for it. Click either the problem solving practice or the quiz option and get started that way. And to show you a quick preview of this by clicking start session, you can see that the AI is giving some students some questions to solve, some equations to solve, and they can use Flint's other features. So if I say something like, could you graph this for me? The AI will actually even be able to help me visualize that problem by creating a quick graph of that equation. I'm going to pause there while that graph loads. Any questions so far about either of those two options and how you'd set those up in Flint?
I have a question. So you wrote Algebra 2. So if we're in Canada and we have different course codes, does it matter, or will it know? Like you had said, you could just put in a course code and it would know to pull up the information from that. Does it matter what country you're in?
Sohan, you're muted.
Yeah, my bad. Sorry about that. That's a good question. So actually, I would recommend uploading a custom study guide or any specific content, because otherwise you're right that Flint will use its best understanding of Algebra 2 to provide you those specific problem types.
In
If I
both.
kind of use an example, Yeah, if I kind of show you an example of what I'd actually recommend putting into the platform, let me go ahead and open this up in a new tab. This would be something that'd be better to upload, where it's like a very specific study guide you've given to your students. Maybe it has the solutions in there, maybe it doesn't. That's okay. Flint can kind of figure out the solutions on its own. And what's nice is if you go into that kind of problem-solving practice option, and then here, instead of just saying Algebra 2, you were to upload that more specific document. Let me go ahead and just find it in my computer and upload it in. You would see at the next step, once that document loads in, that is specifically going to pull the problem types from that study guide. So to answer your question, Christy, I would recommend doing that. You're going to get a lot more specifically oriented to like what you're teaching.
Okay, and it can be a PDF, right? It doesn't have to be like a Word doc or a Google Doc?
Yeah, totally. And this PDF is like actually kind of like blurry and like poor quality. It's got a lot of images in here too, but the AI is still able to read that. So now if I go ahead and click next, you'll see that when it pauses to think here, the categories of problems will match up with whatever was in this study guide. Yeah, so you can see it's a little bit more specific than last time. Yeah, great question. Any other questions about like setting up either of these kind of two simple review activities?
Sohan, we were having trouble with our math, like our geometry ones, getting the activity to just show the graphs like right out of the gate. Like you can ask it to graph it for you, but like we were really having trouble in like setting it up or in the rules, like just getting it to do that automatically for every problem so the kids could see it. Do you have like a suggestion? Is that more in like the beginning, the objectives, or is that in the rules? Like where's the best place to try to set that up?
Yeah, that's a great question. For a more customization like that, let me go back to the activity I made earlier. The best way to do it, and also James, in case it's a more specific question, I'm happy to like chat one-on-one about it because I might have to look at the rules of your activity and how you set it up. I would recommend going to the activity settings, and you could try customizing the rules here, but that does require more of a prompt engineering skill set. You could go into the revise box here and say something like, for every problem, also generate the graph for students to see, for example, and click revise. What that will do is that will encourage Flint to basically rewrite the rules for itself. Because this is a more kind of complex question, you might have to do some more testing and tweaking, but that would be a recommended strategy of doing it is like, go ahead and put in the request there in the revise box. Yeah.
No, that's perfect. I actually didn't scroll down far enough to see that box. I'll try that. Thank you.
Got it. Awesome. Yeah, no worries there at all. We're actually redesigning this page to make that a little bit more obvious. It's kind of hidden right now. Yeah. Cool. With that, we'll jump into the next section, which is the advanced review activities. One other thing I'll mention here is anything I share here in the advanced review activities will also be shared afterwards in this call. So if there's any custom prompts I'm using that you want to try yourself, you can kind of follow along later. And of course, for any of these activities, like I showed earlier, you can, of course, see how each student did, view overall for your class as well, where your students struggled. So for example, for that mitosis quiz I was showing earlier, of course, I can click on Lulu's name and see her specific performance, but also I can see how all my students did. For example, I can see that my students were confused about interphase. If I click on that area of improvement, it'll pull up exactly which students struggled and where. Kind of jumping into the more advanced kind of review activities, this is where we'd recommend clicking the custom activity option in Flint. So for any of you that have been using Flint for over a year, this will be familiar because this is actually the only way, this used to be the only way to create activities in Flint before we added these like more simpler shortcuts. But this allows for a lot more flexibility in how you design activities. So if you're not really getting what you want out of one of these preset options, we'd recommend creating a custom activity. So what I'm going to walk through now is me creating a custom activity for a history class, but of course you could adapt this to your own context. The first part of creating custom activity is adding an objective. This can be as specific as a learning objective from your curriculum or as broad as the instructions that you provide to a teaching assistant to give them all the necessary context to teach and help your students. So the way I prefer to write objectives is just dump in as much information as possible just so the AI knows everything about what I'm doing so that it can best help me. So I'll actually show an example of that. Here in the notes here, I've actually got an example prompt. Before I do that, I'm going to pull up my study guide, which includes basically a bunch of flashcards from Quizlet for the AP US History midterms that I'm hosting now. So what I'm going to go into is I'm going to go into the objectives here and basically upload that document in as a PDF. And then in this case, I've got this pre-written objective, which I'm going to copy paste in, and I'll review what it says in just a moment. I'll also put it in the chat. I wouldn't recommend using this word for word because it's very kind of custom for this demo purpose, but you can kind of get a feel for the type of context I'm putting in to the platform. So I just shared that in the chat as well. But as you can see, it's pretty conversational. I'm basically treating Flint as my teaching assistant. I'm telling it, hey, I'm an AP US history teacher, and my students are prepping for their midterms. So I want you to conduct one-on-one review sessions with them. That way it has the context of what's happening and why I'm even using it in the first place. I'm then saying, okay, it's okay to answer any student questions, but make sure to ask follow-up questions after you provide any sort of explanations to make sure that students really grasp the concept. This is me making sure that it's not just a Q&A chatbot. I actually want them to be quizzed by this AI chatbot as well. Then I'm going to go into the flashcard section. So I'm saying like, okay, after you let students ask their own questions, do some flashcard review with the provided content, which is going to be that PDF I uploaded. And finally, I'm adding this note to additionally give us some more context saying, hey, my students have been a bit stressed out recently, so give them some positive encouragement throughout. So as you can see, this is technically a pretty long prompt, but it's basically the types of instructions I might give to a new teaching assistant joining my class if I wanted them to step in for me and do some one-on-one review activities with my students. What I like about this style of writing a prompt is I can be as informal as I'd like, which makes it easier for me to give it context. If I have any sort of preferred review methods, right? Maybe I want to stick to multiple choice questions that follow the structure of the AP exam. I can just toss that in here as a bullet point and the AI would be able to follow that. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and give it that information. I'm not even going to set a grade level because I've already mentioned to it that I'm an AP US history teacher, and I'm going to go ahead and click next. With these custom review activities, what Flint does is it'll take in the materials you put in and all that context, and then it'll think of a few different ways it can structure that into an activity. So it's basically doing that objective to prompt translation for you, so you don't have to manually do any prompt engineering. So it's basically giving me 3 options to choose from, which will be pretty similar, but I can go with the vibe that I kind of prefer for my students. So the first one, and these are going to be unique every time, is this APUSH midterm review chat, where the AI will go through and help students review for the midterm. The second is a historical mastery check-in, and the third is a historical discussion and review. So let's say I like the mastery check-in, maybe that's what's going to appeal to my students the most, and click next. The AI will now go through, respect all the objectives and materials I put in, and set up this activity for me. I see Vinny, looks like you have a question. Yeah, feel free to unmute and go for it.
No, I actually have a comment. So having worked with teachers, and one thing that I would suggest and recommend is in the objectives that you also then ask the AI tutor or activity to follow up and ask for and check for understanding. That's one of the things that we found was really powerful in building these.
Awesome, that's a great suggestion. I had something a bit more vague, but I like how specific yours is. I kind of said like, yeah, like it's okay to answer questions, but ask some follow-up questions afterwards. But yeah, maybe I could even say something like towards the end of the activity, go through all the content. Like don't wrap up until the students demonstrate a mastery on everything, right? That'd be like a maybe more explicit way of communicating it. Awesome. So now that this activity's been created, I can preview it on this screen. This is basically my space as a teacher to try it out and actually see if the activity is what I want or not. And for these activities that are more custom, I would recommend testing it out a little bit because you are probably using this option if you have a more specific idea of what you want in mind. So basically on this screen, to recap, this is where you can preview and revise the activity. So there's a few features I want to highlight here. The first is the preview feature, and the second is the revise, which I gave a sneak preview of earlier when answering James' question. So here in the middle of my screen, I can see what that activity looks like. And on the left-hand side, I can see all the prompts the AI set up to design this activity. You'll see that it automatically figured out to make this activity infinitely helpful with the full helpfulness level. Because I told it, hey, if the student gets stuck, it's okay to give them the answer because it's a review activity. And then down here, it turned all of my preferences into specific rules that it's following. What that means is I can now preview this. Let's say I preview a C-level response, so students who's kind of struggling before the exam. Once I click that button, Flint will show me an automatic preview in the middle of my screen here, detailing what it would look like if a student's struggling during the conversation. So you can see here that the student kind of provides a vague answer, doesn't really, pick up on what the AI is asking. The AI will give them some encouragement saying, okay, that's a good start. You've done this correctly, but let me build on your understanding so far. And then later on, you'll see that the AI will actually go ahead and give them feedback in terms of strengths and areas of improvement of how they did. So as a teacher, if you want to get a quick idea of what this activity looks like, you can click one of these grade level previews and watch it, or you can do the manual preview and basically engage with this just like you would as a student. And then if you're looking at this activity and you're thinking, wait a second, this isn't exactly what I wanted, or there's another area of this that I'd like to customize that I forgot to mention earlier, that's where I'd recommend using the revise feature. So the reason I wanted to use this APUS history example is we've heard from some teachers, including some of you that registered for today, saying that you wanted to have the midterm review structure mimic that of like an exam, like an AP exam. So let's say I want to go ahead and make this activity more oriented to what the AP exam would look like. I could go ahead and put in this example revision. And I'm going to also share this in the chat so that y'all have access to it. But again, you can really type this in your own language. There's no necessary kind of prompting format you need to use for this. I'm going to now go into that activity that I made and tell Flint, for the flashcard review part of the activity, offer multiple choice options similar to the AP exam. Now, if I go ahead and click revise, you'll see that Flint will go through and actually give students multiple choice questions that follow the AP exam wording. So I'm going to go ahead and click maybe like an A-level response to make sure that the student gets that part in the preview. Lulu, I think there's a couple people waiting, by the way. Perfect. Thanks. And now when the AI gets that kind of review part, you'll see that it will do an excellent job in terms of giving students multiple choice questions to pull from. I might switch over to a different activity. This one seems to be a little bit long-winded. It might get to that point in a minute or so. I'm going to pull up an activity I made yesterday using the same kind of learning objective, same customization, and I'll go ahead and show you what the preview for that looks like. So you can see the AI starts off by really testing the student's understanding of the topic. Then, like I mentioned, it says, okay, do you want to go into some flashcard review? When the student says, yes, I want to do flashcard review, it goes ahead and starts asking questions. And here, if I told it, okay, go ahead and make these multiple choice questions and click revise, you'd be able to see how it gives multiple choice questions following what's done in the AP exam in a moment. While this is all loading, anyone have any questions? Feel free to put them in the chat or unmute and start asking.
Is there a limit to how many students can use this at a time? So is it something that my IT department, like you get a membership and there's a certain number of students that can be on, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would have to probably chat with you one-on-one, Christy, to check the specifics for your school. There's basically two different ways that schools can use Flint. Either they have a license that covers like their whole school or some number of students, or if you're using the free version as a teacher, you can invite up to 79 users in your workspace. So it'd be like a total of 80, like you and maybe 79 students, for example. So at the very least, you should be able to use it with at least most of your students, or 79 of them. And then if your school has a license, there's absolutely no limit. You can use it with as many as you'd like.
Thank you.
Awesome. And as you can see here, just kind of going back to this activity, you can see the AI is now asking these sort of tricky multiple choice, double negative questions, just like you'd see in the AP exam. Awesome. I'm going to pause there. Any other questions about setting up and customizing these sort of custom activities in Flint?
Sohan, I had a question. So What if like they're working in groups? So I was wondering like so this would be like the screen for each student, right? But is there a way to create an activity where they're collaborating, for instance, on completing an assignment or a word problem? Is that something that can be done?
Yeah, it's a good question. There isn't like a group chat functionality in Flint where multiple students can message the same AI. That said, a lot of the sharing permissions in Flint are very similar to Google Drive. So what I mean by that is students do have the ability to share their work with one another. So let's say I go ahead and click update and I've created this activity and I want to give this out to my students. As a teacher, I would just click share activity, copy the link and send it out to them. Now, when my students go in, they're not going to be able to see each other's work, but they can just see their own sessions. So let's say as a student, I can go ahead and start a session, and then I can see my session when I go to the overview page. As a student, let's say I want to share this session with a peer of mine, I could go ahead here, click share session, and add another friend or a group member of mine to the session so they can also see the types of questions I asked.
So
So
it's like a
students can
Google
share.
Drive, like a Drive or a doc to some extent, like a document.
Exactly.
Oh.
And let's say we were both like classmates in classes, mean like I could share this session with you, and then you would actually be able to continue it. And then the teacher would be able to see like, oh, Sohan did half of this, shared it with Yasmin, and Yasmin continued the conversation. So you could kind of do like kind of passing the baton in a sense, but you can't like collaborate in the same chat at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Cool. Any other questions about kind of setting up or using these sort of custom review activities? Ooh, good question from Tony. Would you upload an entire AP exam or is that too much? The entire AP exam is likely fine. That said, the entire content that the AP exam covers is likely not. So for example, when I was prepping for kind of the session today, when I pulled up, I don't have it open in a new tab now, but that like AP US History midterm review, if I pull in all the content from the College Board up to the midterm, where the midterm point would be, that'd be too much content because that'd be like well over 200 pages of content. But the flashcards are enough. So similarly, the exam questions aren't that much data compared to all the underlying content. You could also choose to set up multiple review activities, right? You could create one for Unit 1, Unit 2, etc. So the kind of rule of thumb we have is like it's around 200 pages of content per activity, assuming each page is around 300 words. But if you upload too much, it'll kind of give you a warning and like. Awesome. With that, we'll move into the next section. And of course, near the end, we'll have like kind of room for more questions and Q&A as well. Actually, I'll quickly answer John's question in the chat. For OCR, yes, it can read flat text, so text that is not kind of marked as text in the PDF. So for example, this is one of the PDFs I uploaded earlier for that calculus kind of review problem solving practice activity. You can see here that these are all kind of image based. If I'm dragging my cursor over here, it's not highlighting any of the text. So the AI is able to kind of use image recognition to see the PDFs as well. Awesome. Jumping into the next section is going to be student-led review. So everything I've shown so far is you as a teacher going in, creating an activity, and sharing that with your students. And that's great in the sense that you can really customize exactly where the AI is pulling from, and even tell the AI, like, this is how I want you to run this review activity with my students. The downside, of course, is that it might not be possible to create every type of review activity to meet the needs of each of your students. So with Flint, the nice part is that students can use pre-made activities that we have to do student-driven review, and they can branch off the work you've already created for them to do their own review activities. So we had a question in the registration for this event from someone in the audience, hopefully you're here today, with this request, saying, I'd like students to be able to upload dense reading material, have Flint summarize notes for them, and ask them questions about it. So what I love about this request is it's less oriented around you as a teacher uploading everything possibly for the student to put in, and instead letting them use Flint as like their own review bot. So for that, we've gone ahead and made this quick template, which anyone can use with their students anytime after this call. I'm gonna go ahead and quickly pull it up in my account, and I'll go ahead and share it with you all via the chat so you can start using it as well. So let me go ahead and copy the link, put it in the chat, and I will cover what this kind of template activity does. So if I go ahead and click show more here, I can see a little bit more information. This AI chatbot that I've set up is basically a personal study companion. It allows students to do exactly what was in that request here. It allows them to go in, upload their own content, and the AI will walk them through it and help them review that content on their own. So if you ever go to that link, you can easily click use this template, copy it either into a specific class for your students or just into your homepage to play around with it yourself, and click use template. Then once you do that, you can click start session and see how this thing works. You'll see that the AI will ask the student to either upload a file, maybe of a reading, copy and paste some text, or even type in a concept they want to discuss. And the AI will then go through and help them review this content on their own. So let's say as a student, I go ahead and upload that midterm review study guide from my APUSH class that has all those different flashcards. Maybe here I'd maybe even want to upload like a more dense reading, like a primary source, for example. I can upload that in, and then as soon as I send that to the AI, you'll basically go through and help me review that. So if I say something like, let's start with this, and click send, you'll see that for me as a student, it'll go ahead and start asking me questions based off of this content immediately. So I would say if you're looking for like a content agnostic way for your students to go in on their own, use this as a general support chatbot, where again, you can still see what they're doing. It's still making sure to continue asking them follow-up questions and really test their understanding. You can go ahead and use this template, the link of which I've shared in the chat. Any questions about that?
And also, just a reminder, like any of the activities that you create for them throughout the semester, or even, yeah, I mean, any activities that you create for the students, they can go back to and use as additional practice. So if you created an activity like a couple months ago and you noticed a couple students struggling with it back then, you could tell them to go back to that activity and try it again before the exam. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point. Any of these activities, we don't prevent how many sessions students can have with the activities. So at any point, the student can click start a new session or go to overview and click another session to get started. So even if you just create or use this template for the personal study companion and share this with your students, they could have like 5 to 10 sessions going where they're maybe each one of them reviewing like different content from that exam to kind of drill down on what they need extra help with.
Is there a way to, at the end, if you were giving them a review and you wanted to look at how they did to extract like the right answers from the wrong answers, then to send that as like a PDF to the parents to show their knowledge and like the gaps that maybe they have? Is there a way to extract that?
Yeah, definitely there is. That's a great question. So if I jump into that kind of mitosis example from earlier where I've got some sample data, let's say I click on Lulu's session, right? So as her teacher and Lulu herself would be able to see the strengths and areas of improvement. If I go ahead, click here and click print session, and then in my print window, I'm basically clicking save as a PDF. I can go ahead and open this in a new tab for you all so you can see what that would look like. I would basically get a PDF of the entire session with, sorry, one second, let me open this in a new tab, with the sort of analytics up at the top. So this is what it would look like. I'd be able to see that sort of strengths, areas of improvement. It looks like this is covering this a little bit. And then I would be able to see the whole session as well. Awesome. Cool. And jumping into the next way that you could have students do their own sort of review sessions is actually using the follow-up feature. And this pairs nicely with any of the activities that you may have created earlier, whether it's a simple or a custom activity in Flint. Basically, once your students submit a session, the AI will automatically let them know what they can work on as a follow-up. Then you as a teacher could create a follow-up activity manually for each student if you wanted to, or you can simply encourage your students to go create a follow-up activity and practice more on their own. So for example, let's say I go back to that mitosis activity. You can see that in this student session, for example, in Z's session, the AI has this follow-up suggested. It says, hey, as your next goal, you should focus on understanding the differences in mitosis between animal and plant cells, because that's something either we didn't get to in this review session or it's something you struggled with. So the student can easily go in, click create a follow-up activity, and the AI will enter that as a custom learning objective for them to focus on moving forwards. So all the student has to do now is click next. They can now choose one of the activity types that looks most interesting to them. and they actually have the ability to create and use their own activities. And to kind of go back to Yasmin's question from earlier in terms of student collaboration, a student could create a follow-up activity for themselves and even share it with their peers if they're doing it as part of a study group. And here the student can go in, click one of these options like I did before, click next. And again, in a few clicks, they have an activity that's perfectly tailored to either what they didn't cover in the past review session or what they really struggled with and need some extra practice and help on. So if you have any students that want to go further with Flint, or you want to recommend them to go further with Flint, you can either direct them towards this kind of sort of content agnostic option where they can just go in and kind of do their own practice, or you could have them create a follow-up based on an activity that you've already assigned to them or that they've already done in class. And then as you can see as a student here, this AI activity is now much more focused on plant versus animal cell differentiation, because it realized that from that PDF that the student worked from initially, they didn't cover that content in that first review session that they did on Flint. Any questions so far about sort of that follow-up activity feature? Awesome. And if you have any questions as you get underway, like using the platform, using it for review at any point, to get help while using Flint, you can just go ahead and click Learn More About Flint from the homepage. Click Help, and then we have this live chatbot support, or you could search for any specific questions about, let's say the revised feature. If you wanted to learn more specific tips on how to use that, you can basically search that, go ahead, find that article, and read more of the specific documentation for it as well. With that, with like more or less the remaining time, we're gonna do a quick share out, maybe for the next like 5-10 minutes or so. Is there anyone that wants to share how they've used Flint for review? I noticed there's a few folks on the registration that have already used Flint for exam review. So if anyone wants to go and share, feel free to unmute and share some learnings there. I see a question in the chat from Mrs. Davis. In the meantime, anyone feel free to kind of raise your hand to queue yourself up. Would you need to prompt Flint to ensure that it uses UK English, including in the feedback? That is a good question. For any of the activities, you could change the language to be UK English. So for example, let's say I even go into this cell division activity here. In the activity settings, under language, you can choose English UK, and it's going to automatically update the language. So as soon as I click that, it would basically rewrite all the prompts to then be instead in UK English. Yeah. And yeah, Rob, go for it.
I use it in my programming classes to help kids solve coding problems, but I also kind of oversee our teachers using it. And it's really intriguing the way our English department, and specifically some of the English teachers, are working at developing students' writing process by setting up activities in Flint. We have one in particular that's really exploring fine-tuning all the different prompts and settings to really keep kids from bending the AI to their will, so to speak, and getting the best possible outcome from the activity. So we're finding that the more teachers experiment with it and play with it and tweak it, not only do they learn more, but they produce much better activities than teachers who are just trying to do a quick, hey, check your knowledge kind of thing. But that's been my experience so far.
Awesome. I was wondering, not to put you on the spot again, Rob, if you could share a little bit more around how you've been using it with your CS students. Like, has it been like problem solving practice or just like general kind of concept review? Like, what have they done with it?
Well, I teach a really weird programming class. I teach an intro to game design class using Circuit Python, and they program handheld gaming devices. So there's a very specific set of rules and uses. So I upload, the pertinent documents and pertinent documentation, and then when they want to test their code out, they can post it there and get feedback on how they can improve it, how they could add something, or just if I give them code and they don't understand it, it will help explain how the code works. And I haven't tested it since you guys switched to, I think you switched to Claude. I haven't tested it since then. So it's a second semester class for me. So I'll find out this spring how well it works. But it gives them incomplete or wrong answers just enough of the time to keep them on their toes.
Awesome. I think, yeah, Tony. Is your hand raised? Yeah. I think you're muted. Tony, I think you're muted. Yeah.
No, if there's,
thanks for that, Rob. That's really cool. I'm curious anybody's experience they want to share about getting teachers in, to adopt the platform. So we rolled it out last year, kind of in the middle of the year, and that was, I think, they were already in their they were in their flow, and it just didn't really work. I had a couple of teachers that really did some interesting things, but I'm wondering if anybody has any recommendations on getting better adoption among your faculty.
If we're going to go down, a different route with ticket sales, we should probably do it now.
I could say to time, and I know everybody likes to have things happen right away, but in my many years of doing technology, no matter what the technology is, I found it takes anywhere from 3 to 5 years for somebody to really, an institution to really use it. So last year, we started using Flint last year with just encouragement to explore it and try it out. And you always get those early adopters. Hopefully they're spread over different departments that kind of whisper to their colleagues and they look at it. And then we started, we gave them guidelines for using AI, how to use it, how to introduce it to their students. And then we started this school year with a in-service by an outside person, because frankly, they're tired of hearing me talk about it all the time. And that really kick-started a number of conversations. And then again, you just get momentum. Teachers talk to each other, and as they figure out different ways, and as they figure out it's just not another improved Google, and it can be a time saver for them, it starts to gain momentum. But really, the adoption, I'm looking at them maybe fully getting their arms around it by the next school year. So, and really, hopefully this year, get a good base of teachers that can kind of carry the flag. So
kind of spread the innovation, diffuse the innovation. Thank you, Rob. Appreciate that.
James, I saw you had your hand raised as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I have a 4-pronged strategy. So the teachers here are really resistant to it. Everybody's, we don't have time, everything. And I understand it, right? We all do. We're all teachings. So what I started to do is we have a seminar class period here where it's sort of like we can push in at grade level every month, right? So what I started to do is I started to train the students how to do it instead. So I really focused on getting the students to learn how to use it, because then that started to pressure the teachers that, like, the students are asking the questions about their Flint reviews, et cetera. And the teachers are like, wait, who's using Flint? And it sort of like flipped the script. And so then what I started to do is in my weekly newsletter that I send out from the ed tech department, right? In it every week, I'm just like, hey, and anybody wants to meet about Flint, here's my booking page to my Microsoft calendar. And, happy to meet with you at like 30-minute increments. And then it's like, 1 was that, 2 was like communicating that, like, I'm always available to sit down with you. 3, I started building activities and just dumping them into teachers' classes and letting them know that they're there, and then also telling the students that they're there. And then students started to use the activities that are in the teachers' classes. So then I was like, hey, these kids are using that, right? Check it out. Like, here's the feedback it's giving you. And then those resistant teachers were like, oh, wow, it's really good data, right? And then the 4th one, and this I think is the most important, is I got it through to the admin that every time that they're working with a teacher, if they do an observation, or if they're like, they're having a conversation with a teacher about student test scores or whatever, that one of the suggestions that they're giving to those teachers is like, hey, meet with James to talk about how Flint can support you here. It's sort of like one of the action items that admin is now giving to teachers. So there's my advice.
If the teachers just wanted to use it as a place that generates the actual review, but don't want the students online to do it, is that not beneficial at all? Like say the first step of just getting them on board with this is to create the review itself, rather than them trying to figure out how to teach it to the kids, how to use it, because that's where I'm feeling will be the learning piece. But if there's a way that they put in their information, it makes their review for them. They see that it's taking less time because now an AI feature did it for them. Would that still be beneficial, or is the beneficial part the fact that the students within Flint and getting that instant response?
Yeah, it's a good question. Our view as a company is most of the value is still in the students getting like a personalized response with immediate feedback. That said, you could still use Flint in that first way that you mentioned, in terms of like a teacher using it at least to maybe generate some review questions, right? Or like a structure for the lesson or something. The way to do that would basically be the Talk to Flint feature in the bottom right corner. Here you could go in, it has the same sort of upload functionality of the other tools. So you could upload a study guide, or you can maybe upload like the flashcards and say like, hey, make me 20 or 30 review questions using these flashcards. Or maybe you will upload a few different learning objectives and say, hey, turn this into a few different activity ideas for me, which I'll then go and put into the rest of the platform. So definitely if you're working with a teacher that wants to start with like that initial piece of creating questions, let's say, you could basically use this chatbot to do that.
I think that's something I just recently, with us having, exams and midterms coming up, I've had kind of like pop-up sessions with students and just getting them to understand how they can utilize Flint for those study components and as that additional assistant to help them. And it's nice that we have kind of a wellness track in which I can see every single 9th or 10th grader, and I can get them practicing. And I know initially what we did was we used PD days, and like I know many have said, the amount of time that you're giving teachers to really just jump in and play with the platform and figure out what they can do, and then also have time to actually create something that they could use the next day. That's always been kind of our mantra, I think. So we had also some lunch and learns, like quick 30-minute workshops, and the amount of support from Lulu and Sohan have been amazing in terms of like jumping on a virtual call and working with our teachers and giving them actually specific things to focus on, and then letting them kind of broaden their horizon and going kind of in some steps and tier. We have obviously those early adopters, but we're really promoting Flint as this is our student-facing platform, and we want you engaging. And it's not, at a minimum, understanding how it works is important and critical for us. And we've had a lot of good support from our administration. But the lunch and learns have been really great, and just trying to get time in, and like that 30-minute session, let's talk about one specific feature in Flint, and then try that, and then go out and use it. And so that's kind of been how we've tried to really get some adoption with our teachers.
It's awesome to hear. And one thing I will mention is this larger question of how to drive adoption in schools, how to communicate the value of Flint to teachers. Is something obviously we as a team are working on all the time, especially with folks like Aisha and Tony. We are going to be hosting a Campfire session sometime in January, probably mid to late January, specifically on this topic. And that will be more of a panel discussion. So we'll actually bring on a few admins. Tony, Aisha, Rob, expect emails from Lulu or I in the next few weeks about this, to invite some folks that have been working with teachers who drive adoption on the platform to share what they've been doing and answer questions from folks as well. Because of course you all are the true experts of that on the ground compared to us. So, yeah. Awesome. I know we're wrapping up time-wise, so there's a couple kind of things I wanted to share. Of course, all of you should have Lulu or my emails already in case you have any questions afterwards. If you don't, it's just lulu at or sohan at flintk12.com. And the couple things I wanted to share is we have a few more Campfire sessions coming up in December. And then because it's a new initiative we're starting, I wanted to also share that we're going to be hosting Campfire sessions pretty much every week throughout the entirety of the school year. So we will have these weekly resuming in January as well. So the couple we have in December, we have one tomorrow at 7 a.m. Eastern, covering how Flint can be used for lower school teachers. What I love about that session, which I'm looking forward to, is it'll actually be led by two teachers at two different lower schools in Atlanta. I think one of them is from Wesleyan and one from Westminster, if I'm not mistaken. And they've both been using Flint since like well over a year ago. They're some of our earliest lower school teachers. So they've really seen the evolution of the platform and have come up with all different strategies and ways of using it with their kids. So if you're interested in that, feel free to come by tomorrow. And we also have a session this coming Monday, which is going to be inspired by Spotify. It's a Flint 2024 Wrapped. So we're just going to be covering some product updates we've had over the last year, in case there's anything you're missing or anything you want to get caught up on in terms of what we've added to the tool. So if you're curious about these sessions, feel free to scan that QR code. I'll also drop this link in the chat. And there is a way you can subscribe to that event calendar for the upcoming ones that we haven't yet published, like that sort of teacher adoption session we'll be hosting in January. Awesome. Yeah, Anne, go for it.
Hi. So I think Lulu did put a link in where we could get a copy of this training today. Is that correct or no? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I can go ahead and grab the link as well. But yeah, it should be public so that anyone with the link can access the presentation.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you all for coming. Also, if you all have any suggestions for what other sessions might be helpful for you, your teachers, other people who you talk to, feel free to send us an email. We're always happy to kind of mold these to what you all need. So, yeah.
Thanks. I know the presentation link you sent, but was there the recording? Will that be somewhere too?
Yes. Yeah. I'll send out an email to everyone who is on the same email.
Thank you.
newsletter. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.